Imagine waking up tomorrow and every newspaper in the country has the same front page. A senator, a powerful, well-connected United States senator, has simply vanished. No body, no investigation, no explanation, just silence. The official story? He moved away, changed his name, started a new life. But the people who knew him, his wife, his colleagues, his neighbors, they all said the same thing. He didn't leave, he was taken. And the men who took him, they were not criminals. They were not foreign spies. They were judges, governors, mayors, generals, the most respected men in America. They belonged to a brotherhood so powerful that for 200 years, no president dared cross them. No journalist could expose them, and no law could touch them. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear is not a theory. Every single detail in this story comes from congressional records, court testimonies, and declassified government documents. This is real. This happened. And the reason you never learned it in school will make your blood run cold.
Act 1. The Brotherhood is born.
To understand how a secret society can control a nation, you have to go back to before there even was a nation. The year is 1730. The American colonies are restless, and in the taverns and back rooms of Philadelphia, Boston, and New York, a group of very powerful men are making very dangerous plans. These are not ordinary men. These are merchants who control the ports, lawyers who write the laws, ministers who shape what people believe. And they all share one thing in common. They believe that democracy is too important to be left to the people. So they formed a brotherhood, a fraternal order with rituals, oaths, and symbols stretching back centuries. Some say to the stonemasons who built the great cathedrals of medieval Europe. Others trace the origins even further, to ancient Egypt, to the temples of Solomon, to mystery schools that predate written history. In America, this brotherhood found its perfect home, a new country, a blank canvas, a system of government that, if controlled at the top, could rule the most powerful nation on earth. And so they embedded themselves into law firms, into financial institutions, into military leadership, into every corner of American life where decisions were made and power was held. By the time the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, 8 of the 56 signers were members of this network. By the time George Washington was inaugurated as the first president, his entire inner circle, his generals, his advisors, his closest confidants were brothers. Washington himself, a member since 1752. The nation was not born free, it was born managed. Now, I want to be very clear, not everything this brotherhood did was sinister. Many of its members were genuinely brilliant, genuinely patriotic men who believed they were building something great. But the structure they created, the secrecy, the oaths, the inner circles of power, that structure took on a life of its own. And when a man named William Morgan decided to write a book exposing every ritual, every secret, and every name in 1826, the Brotherhood showed the world exactly what it was willing to do to protect itself.
Act 2. The Man Who Knew Too Much.
William Morgan was not a powerful man. He was a stonemason from Batavia, New York, a working man, a father, a veteran of the War of 1812. He had been a member of the Brotherhood for years. He had taken the oaths, learned the rituals, and watched as men around him used their membership to gain unfair advantages in courts, in business, in politics. And one day, William Morgan decided he had seen enough. He partnered with a local newspaper publisher named David Miller, and together they announced they were writing a book, a complete, detailed expose of every secret, every handshake, every oath, everything the Brotherhood had worked for a century to hide. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Morgan's house was burned, his business was destroyed, he was arrested on false charges twice. Anonymous letters threatened his family. His neighbors were told he was a traitor, a drunk, a liar. But William Morgan refused to back down. Then, on the night of September 11, 1826, a group of men abducted him from the Canandaigua jail where he was being held on those fabricated charges. Witnesses saw him being dragged to a carriage. They heard him shout, "Murder! Help! I am being kidnapped!" William Morgan was never seen again. What followed was one of the most remarkable and most deliberately forgotten legal dramas in American history. 54 men were eventually charged in connection with the abduction. Of those 54, 4 were convicted. The longest sentence handed down was 28 months in prison. Why so lenient? Because the judges hearing the cases were members of the Brotherhood. The prosecutors were members. Several jurors were members. Even the governor of New York at the time, DeWitt Clinton, was a senior member. The system did not fail William Morgan. The system was designed to protect the men who took him. But here is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. The Morgan affair, as historians call it, ignited a political firestorm. Ordinary Americans were outraged, citizens formed committees, churches condemned the Brotherhood from the pulpit, and a new political party, the Anti-Masonic Party, was born specifically to fight the secret network's influence. This was the first third party in American political history. Think about that. The first time Americans organized politically outside the two-party system, it was to fight a secret society. They almost won. In 1832, the Anti-Masonic Party ran a candidate for president. They won Vermont. 7 congressmen were elected on their platform. 17 state legislatures investigated the Brotherhood. And then, quietly, systematically, the investigations stopped. The witnesses recanted. The documents disappeared. The momentum faded. The Brotherhood had survived, and it had learned an important lesson. Public exposure is dangerous, but infiltrating the response to that exposure, that is power.
Act 3. War, Money, and the Hidden Hand. The next 100 years of American history read differently when you know what to look for. The Civil War, officially a war about slavery and states' rights, was also a war about who controlled the financial architecture of the nation. The same banking networks that had funded the Revolutionary War now had a vested interest in which side controlled the new currency system. Abraham Lincoln, himself not a member of the Brotherhood, tried to finance the Civil War by issuing government-backed currency directly, bypassing the private banking cartels. He called these notes greenbacks. In a letter to a friend in 1863, Lincoln wrote something that has been largely erased from mainstream historical education. He wrote that he feared the money power more than he feared the Southern Army, that corporations had been enthroned, that an era of corruption would follow the war, and that the money power of the country would endeavor to prolong its reign by working on the prejudices of the people. Less than 2 years later, Lincoln was dead. Now, I am not saying the banking cartel killed Lincoln. I am saying the documented record of Lincoln's fear about concentrated financial power, combined with the documented reality of what happened to American banking in the decades after his death, tells a story worth understanding. By 1913, 50 years after Lincoln's warning, a group of the most powerful bankers in America gathered in secret on a private island off the coast of Georgia, Jekyll Island. 9 men, representing roughly 1/4 of the world's entire wealth. The meeting was so secretive that the participants traveled under assumed names. They were forbidden from acknowledging they knew each other in public. And the document they produced at that meeting became the blueprint for the Federal Reserve System, the private banking institution that has controlled American monetary policy ever since. This is not a theory. This is in the memoirs of the men who were there. Frank Vanderlip, one of the participants, wrote about it openly in the Saturday Evening Post in 1935. The Federal Reserve was not created by the government. It was created by the men the government was supposed to regulate. Fast forward to 1963. A new president, John F. Kennedy, signs Executive Order 1110, authorizing the Treasury Department to issue silver-backed certificates, again bypassing the Federal Reserve.
Kennedy also begins planning the withdrawal of American military advisors from Vietnam, reducing the profitable war machine the financial networks had invested in since the end of World War II. Kennedy makes a speech at the Waldorf Astoria in April of 1961 that most Americans have never heard. He talks about a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means. He says secret societies are repugnant to a free and open society. Kennedy is assassinated in November 1963. Executive Order 1110-0 is quietly shelved by his successor. American military involvement in Vietnam expands within months. Coincidence can explain one of these things. It struggles to explain all of them together.
Act 4. The Digital Age and the New Brotherhood. Here is where the story stops being history and starts being your life. The old Brotherhood operated through physical networks, lodge halls, gentlemen's clubs, military academies. Power was passed through handshakes, favors, and shared secrets. The new Brotherhood operates through something far more powerful. It operates through data. Today, 5 companies control more information about more people than any government in human history. The combined market capitalization of these companies exceeds the GDP of every nation on Earth except the United States and China. These companies employ former intelligence officials at every senior level. They cooperate with government surveillance programs under classified agreements that their own users are never told about. They shape what news you see, what ideas you encounter, what products you buy, and what candidates you consider trustworthy. The World Economic Forum, an unelected private organization headquartered in Switzerland, holds an annual conference in Davos where the heads of state, the central bank governors, the technology executives, and the media owners all meet behind closed doors. They call themselves stakeholders. They describe their vision as a great reset. No vote was cast to give them this authority. No democratic process placed them in these roles. They simply gathered enough power to make their meetings matter more than elections. The Brotherhood did not disappear. It upgraded. And here is the truly unsettling part. The old Brotherhood, the one William Morgan died exposing, at least had the decency to hide. Today's power networks operate almost entirely in public. They give TED Talks, they write op-eds, they accept humanitarian awards. They have discovered the most powerful secret of all. The best way to hide something is to put it in plain sight and make everyone who questions it feel foolish for looking.
Act 5. The twist nobody saw coming. Now, I need to tell you something that most historians will never say out loud. The secret society that William Morgan died exposing, the same network that protected Lincoln's assassins, shaped the Federal Reserve and embedded itself in every presidency from Washington to the present day, they did not just survive every attempt to expose them. They funded every attempt to expose them. The anti-Masonic Party of the 1830s, several of its founders were members or had financial ties to the same banking networks they claimed to oppose. The populist movements of the 1890s, absorbed and redirected by the very industrial powers they were fighting. The investigative journalism of the early 1900s, the muckrakers, many of them were given access and funding by competing factions of the same elite network. This is perhaps the most sophisticated power move in human history. If you cannot stop the resistance, you lead the resistance. You control both sides of the argument. You decide how far the investigation goes. You determine which truths get told and which ones stay buried. And right now, you are watching this video on a platform built by one of those 5 companies we talked about earlier. Algorithms designed by former government officials and intelligence veterans decided whether this content reached you or stayed buried at the bottom of search results. Ask yourself, why did you find this video?
Was it the algorithm rewarding honest history? Was it genuine search traffic from people hungry for truth? Or is there something more complicated happening? A system so sophisticated that even the act of questioning it has been built into the system itself. I do not have the answer to that question, and anyone who tells you they do is either lying or selling something. But the fact that you are asking it, that is exactly what William Morgan wanted when he sat down to write his book in 1826.
So what do you do with all of this? Here is the genuine lesson, the value I promised you at the beginning of this video. Power does not disappear, it migrates. Every time humanity has risen up to challenge concentrated power, the French Revolution, the American founding, the labor movements of the 20th century, the digital rights movements of our own time, the result has not been the elimination of power structures. It has been the creation of new ones. The men who built the Federal Reserve were not evil geniuses. They were rational actors maximizing their position in a system that rewarded exactly what they were doing. The tech executives building today's surveillance architecture are not twirling mustaches in dark rooms. They are optimizing for engagement metrics and quarterly earnings in a system that rewards exactly what they're doing. The real hidden power is not in any secret handshake. It is in the structure of incentives that makes these systems self-perpetuating. William Morgan understood this. He did not just want to expose a brotherhood, he wanted to show ordinary people that the systems they trusted had been captured, and that the first step to recapturing them was simply to see clearly. 200 years later, that is still the only real answer. See clearly, question the framing, follow the money, and never, ever let anyone make you feel foolish for asking who benefits. That is what they're actually afraid of, not the conspiracy theorist, not the protest, the person who simply asks who benefits and who pays. If this video made you think, share it with someone who still trusts the official story, not to frighten them, but because the best defense against systems of hidden power has always been the same thing: people who talk to each other. Subscribe to Capture Smart. Every week we go deeper into the history they do not teach, the geopolitics they do not explain, and the systems they hope you never understand. The next video drops in 7 days, and trust me, you are going to want to see what we found.